In our last Night Below video, we covered how Book 1, The Evils of Haranshire, would play out if you ran it strictly by the book and your players followed the most obvious path through the module. But is that really the best we can do? Of course not. So in this video, we'll be going through 5 ways you can improve this part of the adventure. Let's get right into it. Number 1, let the party meet Jelenneth. This is the first place in Night Below that I suggest deviating from the original adventure. Jelenneth, a woman who's kidnapped very early on in the module, can be a driving force behind the plot. However, if you run the adventure as written, the only connection your players have to her is the innkeeper's despair, and a picture of her that he hands them when he begs them to find her. It's fine, but the module treats the search for her kind of like a long, drawn-out, "Sorry Mario, your princess is in another castle" series. And I think the module works better if the players have a little more emotional connection to her. Sure, you could do this with Session 0 and a backstory connection or what have you, but I prefer a more direct approach. Consider having Jelenneth hanging out in the inn the night before her kidnapping. I portrayed her as a friendly and outgoing character who is curious about the new faces in town and wants to know who the PCs are. I was going for kind of a Zoe Deschanel and New Girl kind of friendly, naive, goofy vibe, and I'm not really sure I pulled it off, but the players seemed to like her anyway. The point was to make sure that the players had a positive, direct interaction with her before her disappearance, so they'd be more motivated to pursue her kidnappers, and it worked really well for my last group. Number 2, keep the NPCs out of the party. There are several places in this module that suggest that higher level NPCs travel alongside the party at certain points. I avoid this setup for 3 main reasons. The first is very obvious DM advice that having higher level NPCs in the party can lead to the problem of the NPCs upstaging the heroes, and I won't get into that in detail. That's been covered in thousands of YouTube DM advice videos. Another reason I personally avoid this is because I find combats easier when I only have to track NPCs that are opposing the characters, so it's just easier on my brain as a DM. Doesn't mean I'll never have an NPC travel with the party, but when I do have NPCs traveling with the party, I don't want their stat blocks to be even more complicated than the PCs, which is typically the case when they are higher level characters. Lastly, this is an adventure that was built for another edition of D&D, so you're going to be updating things and converting things from one edition to another. Encounter balance in 5e can be tricky already, and adding the oddball NPC to the party that doesn't match the party's level makes encounter balance and all the conversions even more difficult. If for some reason you feel like you absolutely have to have these NPCs along for the ride, I'd suggest scaling back their levels a bit so they're only 1 or 2 levels higher than the PCs. That'll at least make the encounter balance piece a little less wonky. 3. If your PCs have background story elements that you want to address in-game, you're probably going to want to get them out of the way during Book 1. Once you get past the first book, PCs will be spending the majority of their time deep in the Underdark, far away from their surface contacts, which can make these storylines difficult to wrap up later on without making the players go way out of the way from the plot line that they're probably pursuing pretty heavily. There are 2 exceptions to this advice. 1, if your players' backstories are connected to the Underdark somehow, then by all means lean into that and wait to resolve those plot points when you get down there. The other exception is if those character backstories involve spellcasters. Because of what Darlakanand is doing, having his minions kidnap spellcasters for his sinister plot and bringing them to the Underdark, it's actually really easy to introduce a spellcaster NPC from a character's backstory as a prisoner that the characters rescue from mind flayers or aboleths or whatever. Number 4, do something interesting with the bandits in the Garlstone mines. I know that's probably too broad of a suggestion, but bear with me for a moment. There are several groups of bandits in this book. One is led by the evil cleric Ranchifus, who attacks the PCs on multiple occasions, and then they encounter him again in Brokenspire Keep. He is a very memorable mini-boss. The leaders in the Garlstone mine, not so much. They're given a couple lines of personality in the text, but very little opportunity to actually show it off. And there's nothing that happens afterwards in the adventure that depends on you running them as is. So treat them like a blank slate and take the opportunity to make them interesting and awesome. As an example, the last time I ran the adventure, there was a warlock in the party whose patron was a kraken. So I turned those bandits into a cult with lots of tentacles and things in their symbolism. They actually worship the Mind Flayers, but the PCs didn't know about the Mind Flayers yet, and I wanted there to be at least a moment of hesitation where the party was guessing whether or not these cultists could be allies. My players were pretty suspicious from the jump and quickly realized that they were not followers of the Kraken, but even a short-lived moment of in-game hesitation was worth making them more interesting than what was in the original text. And 5, make the orcs more than a hack and slash mini dungeon. Personally, I do this to avoid both the what do we do with the baby orcs dilemma and the they're orcs so obviously they're evil assumption. But I think my spin on the orcs fit with the story as originally written and also adds to the tension. I made some major changes to Garundriek. That name is so hard to pronounce, it should probably be its own bullet point in this video. Anyway, I made major changes to Garundriek, who is depicted as this crazy grandma orc in the original text. I've always imagined her to be kind of like an orcish version of the Sheriff of Nottingham's mom in that old Kevin Costner movie. In any case, in the last game I ran, I made her into a wiser, more matronly figure who recognized the Mind Flayer's influence and led some of the orcs, including the non-combatants, away from the main stronghold. The players meet her in the tunnels before they ever get to the stronghold, where she tells them about the Mind Flayer influence and asks for help liberating her people from the Mind Flayers. Fighting their way through is still an option, but they have more opportunity to approach this part of the adventure creatively. My last group talked their way into the stronghold, then challenged the chief to a contest in battle, then supported Garundriek in her bid to assume leadership of the tribe after they defeated the chief, who was under Illithid mind control. The outcome was pretty awesome. There was still an epic battle, but there was a lot more to it than kill all the orcs. And I got the opportunity to develop Garundriek as an NPC later on in the campaign because she wasn't just another orc to be slain. If you've run the adventure below, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on these changes. And if you use any of my suggestions in your own game, I'd love for you to come back and let me know how your sessions went. In the next Night Below video in this series, we'll be digging into an overview of Book 2. We'll see you then.